Today we're going to talk a little bit about the forks on the CB400t, the Honda Hawk. We're going to take a little bit out of this, make the stance come down just a little bit. Now I think that might be not as much in this as I hope. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to get the stance maybe to, might ride, that might be a bit aggressive, but the front here, the back there, if we can get it to be level, maybe even slightly down on the front, that would be pretty cool. I think the overall stance of the bike, the look of it would be pretty cool if we could get it to be more tipped down. But I don't think that's going to work. Like a lot of old Hondas, this has got a 19 in the front and an 18 in the back. So just in general, looking at it, it's going to look like it's taller in the front. But we're going to give it a shot. That's today's job. Stick around, guys. Alright, to start with, I just want to show these. The forks are not the same. So clearly you can see that. There's a brake mount on this side, there's not a brake mount on this side. So when you do this, I'm going to demonstrate with this one, so we'll put this one back. Now I'm going to use this one because it's going to fit in the vise much better, much easier. The next thing you're going to need is a 6mm hex. Now that is at the bottom, basically kind of where the drain would be. Like there'd probably be a drain like right there on a regular fork that I've dealt with in the past. All right, so a couple of things. This, if you have an impact, would be great because you kind of want to sneak up on this and just give it a snap. And preferably not snap it out of the vise. I just didn't want to put a lot of pressure on that aluminum. Great. So once we get this released, that's like the tech tip of the day for this particular fork. And I'll show you that in a moment. We've got that pulled out of there, and so that'll come out of there with a little like compression washer. It's a little brass washer that's right there at the end of this. So we'll set this aside. Now, maybe I'll get the vise out of the way. What we're going to do next is we're going to take this out. Now this is where I messed up when I did this myself the first time, is I took this out like you would traditionally, take the cap off, take the spring out, snap off the bottom bolt, and blah, you're done. This one is actually holding pressure on the spring. So it allows you to get that snapped off without really too much concern. Let me grab a 14mm hex. Alright, so this I found you can actually just turn with your hand. And this would be like on a normal fork where you'd have that cap on it, you'd get near the end and you'd be worried that it's going to just spring across the garage. So in this case, all of the dampening, I think this would be like maybe a progressive type. I say it won't shoot across and then it does. One sec. There it is, way up there. That was fun. Oh, good shot of how dirty the garage is. All right, so I don't know what this is actually called, but I just call it like a little hat washer, and it goes upside down in that spring. It kind of sits there and kind of squares up the surface. So you have that, and this is what I was talking about, that weird, it's like a threaded washer with that hex in there. So this goes like that on top of the spring. So let's take those out. spring comes out. Now that this is apart, this is what I was talking about before. You used to have to like snap and get past that, but it just pulls right off. Okay, so this is free now, and there's nothing else in there. There would be oil in that. Well, by now we would have taken the oil out. And there's the seal, which looks really great. So set that down. And then we've got this bit for that. And that's going to come out the top. So punch him out. Oh boy. That is really rusted. Okay, so this is what it would normally look like before that piece. It's going to have this. Basically, like that is what's inside there. But this is how it is inside the tubes. Okay, so you've got this threads into that. So I don't know if you can see the threads. This would be resting into the spring like that to give it a flat surface for this to go on. And if we look inside the tube, look at how much. Come on. How about we give you some light? Can we? No. Boo. Oh, here we go. Flashlight to the rescue. Look at how much threads. I would say that's probably over like 1.5 inches. And that's where you can add like your dampening. So you just would screw that guy in a little bit deeper. This is the cap that goes on. Now the interesting thing about that cap is that it actually goes through the top of the triple tree, which reside here. That O-ring is capping off the oil. There's only 4 ounces of oil in the fork, which I thought was extremely low until I looked it up, and it's true. And if we look, both forks, dumping them out, was right at 8 ounces. So very good. Anyway, back to our story here. So we've got threaded washer, the hat, spring, and when we put the spring in and out, we want the tiny tight coiled spring to be at the top, smaller springs near the bottom. Here's a section that we cut off, about 2 inches. So all of that is in the top tube. Okay, in the bottom tube, how it gets assembled is, here's your, I don't know what these parts are actually called, but we'll call this the plunger. And then you have your dampening spring would go on. That would then go into the tube like that, or sorry, down through the top of this, and it would be right there. Then this mates up to that inside the tube, which would be at the bottom of this. Okay, so this piece of the tube goes into that, travels into this. This is inside that, like that. And then this basically screws into that, tightening this shaft. That's why we want pressure pushing down on this to keep that rigid when we snap this off. Okay? Now, to make this shorter, all that we need to do is I'm going to put this dampening spring on first, and then we're going to put this big spring, the one that we cut off actually, on. And that's going to reduce this amount of travel that it has at the bottom, which actually makes the fork stanchion come in lower. So let's reassemble. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we're going to take this whole assembly and we want to drop that in to the top. I'll take just a little bit of a lining to get it to go down to the bottom, and it should poke out the bottom. That sounds about right. There we go. Okay, so we've got that coming out through the end. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take this guy, there we go, and put him in there. He won't go in any farther than the end. Okay, then we're going to put him into, actually, pause for 1 second. Give this a good wipe from touching it so much. Then we'll dab just a little bit of old fork oil on our fingers. Kind of lube up. That should do enough. Lube up the seal. Okay, and we're going to push this whole thing past the seal into the bottom. Okay, so that should be now down here in the bottom. And this guy, a bit of a trick, we put him on our just get him started. Okay, started. Now we'll put our spring in. Remember, tiny springies near the top, wider springies to the bottom. So that'll slide in. Then we've got our little hat guy. And then we've got our threaded washer. And then you just tighten. It might take a minute to get it to bite. But once we get it to bite, there we go. We don't need a lot of pressure on there. And then we can tighten up the bottom. I'm just going to press in a little more. This guy, we'll maybe go about half the distance into the tube here. I'd say that's fine. And now we've got a shortened fork. Okay, well, what do you guys think of that little tutorial on the forks? I thought that went by pretty good. A couple of things to note though. We still need to put fork oil in, 4 ounces in this spec. If you guys have ever watched a video like this before, you would probably have seen they make a spacer out of like a metal pipe, 2-inch pipe they put in there. But prior to making this video, I just watched a guy do this and cut the spring. He just put the spring piece that he cut off in there. And I think that's perfect sense because you don't lose any of the suspension parts. You just lose the travel. And if you're not really fat, if you don't go too crazy with how much you take off, you shouldn't bottom these out. That still is the concern. I don't think it's going to be a problem. The other thing I wanted to mention is that these forks are not the same, right? When you look at them, I know we mentioned this already, but the reason why I chose to do this one to show you guys is because there again, this brake mount fits really well into a vise. If you don't have a vise, do it on the bike. I already got this off of our bike, but these, where they would sit naturally on the bike, is a perfect clamp. Perfect way to be able to hold this so you can get that torque that you need, snap off this end, and maybe to reassemble even. Something to hold if you don't have a vise. So I guess with those two things, obviously remember we got to put the fork oil back in. But we got them both at 13¼ inches, which the travel should be right on, and I'm really looking forward to getting these back on the bike. If you like what you see, guys, hit that like button. I don't know if it helps or not, but it makes me feel good. Leave a comment. I love making this a conversation. If you really like what you see, hit that subscribe button. It's free. Why not have something else to do at work? Besides work.